Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Leadership Purpose with Dr. Robin podcast. I'm so glad you're here and you're listening to the podcast. I say it all the time and I'll continue to say it because we wouldn't have a podcast if you weren't listening in. And because you listen in so faithfully, you helped us get ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to Listen Notes. So thank you for doing that. And if you would, go ahead and rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. It'll help us keep going. All right. Now, today, and I'm really excited about our guest today. I'm talking to Jeanne Sparrow. She's an award-winning speaker, author, Fortune 500 consultant, and seven-time Emmy winner. She's author of the book Fearless Authenticity: Lead Better, Sell More, and Speak Sensationally. Oh my goodness, I have 100 questions already. But let me just say a little more about Jean. She has 3 decades of award-winning work in media, and she's reached more than 500 million people. Yes. And she's has her host her own daily TV talk show for 7 years, co-hosted daily radio shows with giants like Steve Harvey, George Wallace, and she's interviewed people like Kevin Costner, Holly Berry, Jamie Foxx, and more. And one of my favorite things that I hope we get to talk about more is she hosts a weekly radio show. And so we'll hear more about that. I can go on, but let us now welcome Jean Sparrow. Welcome to the
Robin,
podcast.
thank you so much for having me, Robin. I appreciate it. Dr. Robin.
Oh,
Let me call you by that well-earned honorific.
okay, so for most people, I say just call me Robin, but for me, for you, it sounds like it means something, so you can call me whichever you like.
Thank you, dear. Thank you so much. It's nice to meet you. I love that a robin and a sparrow are getting together and doing bird things. Come on now.
That's a poetic mind that can make that kind of connection and think about that. All right, so let's just jump in. You heard me give your sort of official introduction, but tell us in your own words two things: a little bit, whatever you want to say about you, and then kind of an overview of the work you're doing, and then we'll get more into it.
Okay. If I had to say, I'll go backwards. If I
Okay.
had to say there was an overview or a theme to what I do, all I know how to do, Robin, is talk. That's all I've ever done. That's all I've ever, all I am doing, and probably all I'll ever do. I have just found the different ways that talking means something. So whether that's,
Mm,
radio and television media, whether that's, speaking, whether that's teaching, whether that's doing training and consulting, the core of all of that is talking. It, I find great satisfaction in hearing people's stories, telling other people's stories, telling my own. And I believe that that is what keeps us connected and keeps the world moving around. And that's what Fearless Authenticity, the book, is all about. So that's my latest thing I've added to the talking piece. And so I'm talking through the words that are on the page, which is a little bit different, but still in the same vein. And if I had to say anything about myself, it would be that I am inspired by other people when they share their stories and tell the truth.
mm, yes, yes. All right, say more about telling the truth. And we see authenticity is a theme for your book. So tell us about that. What you mean by that.
So, fearless authenticity means something very particular to me, and I chose those words very intentionally. I say fearless because being authentic and being, your true self in whatever way you see fit takes a lot of courage. Um, and the word fearless, I think, is a misnomer in some ways. So it's one of those odd words because fearless doesn't mean without fear. It just means you do it anyway. You do it scared. And I think a lot of times the chances that we take in life, whatever they are, involve us doing things even though we're scared of them. But at the same time, I know you've heard that saying that if your dreams don't scare you, then they're not big enough.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and authenticity, emphasize authenticity because what I have learned through my work and just all the people I've encountered and interviewed and talked, the people who are the most successful and satisfied in life are the ones who lean into who they truly are. And I believe that when we do lean into that, either we find our purpose or it finds us, and we're able to fulfill the thing that we were put here on this earth to do. And that's really what fearless authenticity is about. And the more we speak the truth about who we are, what our experiences are, or at least understand the value in that and move with authenticity, because sometimes full disclosure is not appropriate or recommended, right? Or safe. But when we can move with authenticity, when we can stay true to ourselves and that listen to that little voice that's in our gut and in our heart that tells us we're on the right path, then we will eventually come out on top.
Yes, yes. And, I'm just over here shouting inside with joy, and I resonate with what you're saying naturally, which is why we're having this conversation. But I have not heard anybody else articulate it in the same way that you did, because for me, and this podcast is Leadership Purpose, and what I teach people is how to connect with their purpose and to not only connect with their purpose, but to always make decisions so they stay in alignment with it and have
Amen.
fulfillment. And so I've done that. And so I teach others to do that. And that's my definition of purpose. In fact, I did an episode, by the way, listener or who's watching, listening or watching, episode 209, I talk about this. How my definition of your true purpose is to be your authentic self and how to do
Ah,
that. So you and I are on the same
love this.
wavelength. That's
I
right. Not
love it.
just
And
the
it's nice
birds,
and yes,
not just the birds, but we got the authenticity and purpose coming together. All right.
indeed.
All right. So now tell us about your career journey. You can tell anybody. Let me give you a little context while you're thinking about it. Think about somebody who is in a career and they, by everybody else's definition, they're doing it's success on paper, but they're feeling like, I'm not feeling this has any purpose or meaning for me. There must be something else. And it's in the back of their mind. And that's why they're listening to the podcast and they're just trying to get some direction. So I thought, let's have these conversations and from people who've been there, then it can inspire them as they're on their way.
So this is the first thing that popped in my mind when you talked about that person, because every time that I approach becoming that person, I move on. I am somebody who has had a wide range of things, as you heard in my bio, of things that I've done that, yes, have a theme that connects them to. But the reason why I've explored so many different aspects of this thing that I do is because when I get tired of doing something, when I get bored, when I get to a point where I don't even know how to describe it, Robin. It's kind of like an itch, but it's not really an itch. It's more like just a discomfort, like I no longer belong. It's like that Nanny McPhee, if anybody has ever watched that movie, when she says, when I am needed but not wanted, I must stay. When I am wanted but no longer needed, I must go. That's how I feel when I am needed and there's something, some purpose I'm fulfilling, some role that I am inhabiting in a way that nobody else is in that space, then I'm there and I'm thriving and what have you. But once the challenges stop, once that feeling goes away, I'm out. And I had a coworker ask me one time, he was just like, you bail on every gig right before things go to hell. And I was just like, it just looks that way from the outside. I know nothing about what companies are going to be taken over. And especially at that point in my life that he was talking about, I was paying no attention to corporate takeovers and buyouts and all those different things. I was just leaving when the spirit said it was time to go.
Mm, yes.
And I encourage anybody because I think we often stay places far longer than we should because of a variety of reasons, and all of them could be perfectly correct for you, whether that's earning a living for your family to support them, whether that's or to support yourself or to get to a certain place in life that you thought was right and you're just following it. Absolutely do all those things. But if something in your spirit says that it's time to move, you better move because if you don't move, spirit will move you.
Yes. Yes. I agree. I agree. And so it sounds like you are someone who's in tune with your spirit. And so that's something you could hear. So there's two things involved. You can hear it and then actually respond to it. All right, so let's set this in context for people and talk about. Uh, you can hit some highlights because you have such a wealth of. You can say as much or little as you want. You know what I'm interested in. I'm just interested in your whole because a communicator and how you've been doing that throughout your life. So you can pick up anywhere in your career journey, and then I can bring us back and ask some questions to
Okay.
help us know where how you got to where you are now. So maybe
Oh,
the
goodness.
milestones or the maybe
Yes.
the big milestones or the yeah, however you want to approach it. I'll get to what we're looking for. You can just start anywhere.
So I'm going to start at my first job because it was so particular in the way that it happened. And it is also emblematic of the way a lot of things have gone in my life. I was on a speech and debate team in high school. And I'm from a little town called New Iberia in Southwest Louisiana. Um, and you know, sugar cane and hot and Tabasco sauce is what we do, right? Is this little town in the country having a good time. And my mother did not want me to have just any old job. Like she was just like, even though she could see the value in working at, say, McDonald's or, something like that, she always wanted me to do something extracurricularly that would help me and my development, right? And she was scared, I think, that I would get a job and fall in love with the money, right? Because when you get your first little job and you have your little stuff, you're like, oh, I'm gonna make some more money. I'm gonna take some more shifts so I can get me a car or do this.
Mm-hmm.
She knew me. So she was like, unless it's adding something to your future, your education, or something unique, you don't have my permission to go to work. And so when I was on the speech and debate team, my speech coach was contacted by one of the local programmers who'd like to hire high school kids because our local university had a very strong broadcast communications program. So, kind of in a way of keeping talent at home, he would hire in high school and you would work all the way through college. And, some people even got hired and so on and so forth. So she sent me and my best friend to audition for a job at the local radio station, a country western station, KNIR, girl. And I got the job. And yes, I'm still friends with that friend. It had, because we didn't even know what it was. It was just like we went and we read something on the paper, and then they decided, what they liked or what have you. So I started working, and my mom approved of that job because she thought it would develop further skills, or it was something unique and different.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think, and in those days, your college after applications didn't have to have all these extra things on them the way they do now. Like we didn't do public service. Even if we did public service, it wasn't on our college applications. Like we actually wrote those things out back in the 1900s. And um and so that's what started everything. Everything starts from there. Because had I not had that job, I wouldn't have gone to school and been on the college radio station. And then I wouldn't have had something to fall back on when I decided not to go to grad school. Because the whole reason why I have a career now is because I took what would be called a gap year between college and grad school. I was like, I wanted, because my major was in psychology. I'm fascinated by people. And so my intention was to become a therapist. And I knew that I wasn't really mature enough to go to be to do a clinical program at that point. So I was like, I'll just work a year. And I go to the career center in college. I went to Northwestern. That's how I ended up in Chicago. Um, I go to the career center and I was just like, yeah, I don't know what I want to do. I've been a secretary, like I was an assistant, research assistant, doing all these things on campus with my little work study. But I was like, I don't know if that translates to the real world. And they were like, okay, we'll get you a temp job so you can make a little money, but we're going to also send you for this internship at this radio station. And this radio station was WGN Radio, which is like one of the most influential radio stations in the country. And I ended up working there. I worked as a copywriter, but I knew I wanted to be on air because at that point, I had been on the college radio station and really had fun with it. And then when I had the conversation with the career counselor, they were like, yeah, you can make money doing that. Yeah, you're doing it for free here. And you hardly made any money in New Iberia, but in Chicago, and in major markets, you can make some bank. And I was like, I can. Okay, well, I'm only doing this for a year anyway. Next thing I know, I have a whole career. I didn't go back to school until 2014. And it wasn't for psychology. I went back to get my Master of Science in Communication because at that point, I had been in the business for basically 30 years. But I went from, doing radio, I did traffic, I was a news reporter. And then, of course, I was a jock as well, hosting on music radio. And I was at one of the best stations in the country out of Chicago called WGCI. It was where Doug Banks and Tom Joyner were, and of course people know Tom Joyner, the fly jock. The whole fly jock thing started at GCI,
Oh,
and it was one of the most especially at that time admired and um, copied radio stations as far as the format and how it was done in the country at that time. For Black stations at the time, it was called urban radio,
remember that.
urban. But yeah, for Black stations, formats, R&B, hip hop, and things like that, that station was like the place to be. And I just ended up there through happenstance and grace. And from there, I did television part time. Then I started doing it full time. And um, yeah, girl, worked for damn near every station in Chicago on TV. And yeah, just and then because I was always speaking as a part of my job and didn't realize that that was a separate career until my last show got canceled. And I had been doing some consulting and things because when I went back to grad school, I was still on the air. And I realized then that there were a lot of things that we knew in broadcast that people who I thought were good communicators and professional communicators still didn't know. Like in my cohort in my grad school program, half of the students asked me to help them with their presentation style at some point in time. So I was already coaching at that point. I was like, what you mean you're nervous? Don't you do this all the time? And they were like, well, no, but yeah, but I don't like it and whatever. Like, but you talk to people all the time. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I understood why we would get people on our show that would bomb, like completely wonderful, smart, brilliant individuals who are running companies, but they got the shakes and the sweat sitting on a couch to talk to two girls about some public service thing they're doing that their company is doing, some, corporate social responsibility thing. And I'm like, why are you nervous? You run a whole company. Why is being in the studio a weird thing for you? But then I started to see that that was my reality and that was normal to me. And it wasn't necessarily normal to everybody else. And so as I started getting opportunities to speak and to come in and consult and train, I developed a program because I thought my business was going to be media training because that's where I saw the big gap. But I had to do so much to get people ready to be media trained that I had to figure out a system for it. And that's what's in the book. Like,
Oh,
because basically, I realized that the problem wasn't that they couldn't communicate on television or radio. The problem was they weren't communicating internally and didn't have a grasp of their messaging, because no matter how many publicists you hire that give you, or marketing people you hire that give you great, things to talk about, if you don't have an understanding in your heart about what that is and how you're relating to other people, who your audience is, why they care about the things you're saying, it's always going to come across empty. So that's the reason why I ended up writing the book.
Oh, makes sense. All right. So, as you know, I have 1,000 questions. So
I
I'm going
know
to try
you
to,
do.
I'm trying to rein it in. I'm going to come back. I'm going to hopefully keep this. I'm going to come back to where we are now. But let's go back to high school when you got on the radio station. What were you doing as a high school student on the radio
I was
or
just,
for the station?
I was introducing, because it was a country western station. So I was introducing music my daddy listened to. Because remember, I'm from South, I'm actually from the same parish in Louisiana where Tina Knowles is from.
Oh,
So
oh. Hmm.
Beyonce's mama is cousins with one of my best friend's mamas. So where her family is from in Louisiana is the same place. Okay, so so we'll start there with that part. Um, and so like when you talk about Country Carter, I remember when Country Carter came out, I was like, yeah, we finally getting ours. Because like my daddy loved country western music. If you ever heard Zydeco music from Southwest Louisiana, which is all the purview of Creole people, we've been creating that music and that is ours too. So it wasn't a stretch for me to be on a country western station because my dad listened to it, right?
I
So I
see.
knew Charlie Pride and I knew who Waylon
Wow.
Jennings was. I knew the music. It wasn't necessarily my music at that time. It was my daddy's music though, and my grandmommy's music. So I heard it, I was familiar with it. So I just talked about the music. Like, this is coming up, you do a little time check, you do a thing. They tell you what, like he gave me kind of a little crash course of whatever. But I already loved radio before that because I never thought of it as something that I could do as a career, but I listened to the radio all the time. Girl, I got my first radio when I was 6 years old and asked for it. Like it
Ah.
wasn't just because my parents gave it to me.
Mm.
I was like, I want a radio. I wanted
Did
my
you know?
own.
How did you know that there you could have your own radio? Did your family have another radio or like what?
There was the radio in the car. And
Mm.
then remember, that's when boom boxes were first coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one I got when I was 6 years old, though, this was my mama had given me a jewelry box that had a little radio on it.
Oh,
And
she knew.
I loved it. My mother was a musician. So
Oh.
I always was used to like I play and the thing was I think my mama got me that so I wouldn't be messing with her stereo. That's what I really think because I had a habit of destroying things. I was hard on I got a heavy hand, Robin. I got a heavy hand. And so I wasn't allowed to touch things. And because my mother was a musician, we had a piano in the house. There was a record player in the house, like because vinyl was the main way, like CDs and cassettes didn't even exist then. It was 8-track tapes and vinyl when I was a kid, 45s and albums. LPs, if you will.
That's
And
right.
so there was always music in the house. I loved music, and I think my mama got me that jewelry box to keep me out of her stuff. But then after that, I was like, it's not loud enough. I want my own. I got it on 10 and it's not loud enough, mama. And she was like, you don't need to be listening to it that loud, baby. Uh-huh. Can I have a real radio of my own? And so she got me this little, little boom box. And then she had for her work cassette players,
Mhm.
the
I
kind where you
remember.
had to press with the two
I
buttons.
remember those.
She had those, but I wasn't allowed to touch those either because she used those for work. She would record her choral students and make them listen back so that they could understand how they sounded. And that's how she used to do with me whenever I had a poem to do for school, a book report, or whatever. Baby, I got coached and I still use like literally that is the foundation of the methods that I use to work with my clients now.
Isn't that fascinating? Did you enjoy it? So it sounds like you were a speaker early on. with your poetry and other things?
Girl, my mama told me I started talking at 9 months old, and I don't think I've shut up since.
What were you talking about when you were little? Did they say, or were you just talking about anything?
I think I just ran my mouth to just
Hmm.
be running it. Well, you know what? I was always, and I still am, very curious slash nosy. So my favorite question was, well, why? Well,
Hmm.
why they did that? Because
Hmm.
if I didn't understand, I wanted to understand. So I was always asking questions. And being an only child, I was able to ask questions, but then they had to school me about being in other groups and being like, the stuff we do at home, everybody don't do. So I'm gonna need you to behave yourself. But in school, like I always had ideas and I was always, and the way I expressed them was verbally. And yeah, it made like even in kindergarten, like during nap time, I was trying to talk to the kids, other kids. I would be like, listen, I was at school. It was social time. Why are we lying down? I don't understand. And Miss Butler had had enough of me. And because my mama was a teacher and in the same school system, and we literally lived down the street from that school. Oh, Miss Butler called my mama and was like, you're gonna have to do something with this child. So my mama was friends with one of the first grade teachers. It was a Catholic school, Sister Albertine. The reason why she was friends with Sister Albertine was because they both played the piano and they were really the only two pianists in town. They were like maybe four in town. So they played every wedding, every funeral, whatever. And so since we were down the street, Sister Albertine used to come and visit. And so my mama was like, listen, can you have Jeanne in your class when it's nap time? Can Miss Butler bring Jeanne over so she can have something to do? She'll be intimidated by the first graders. She was like, give her something hard to do so that she won't be bothering everybody. Because I always was the one, because when I was in school, they were experimenting without using grades. So it was either satisfactory, unsatisfactory. It was like S's, U's, and
Hmm.
something else. So
Hmm.
I was always getting the good stuff, except in conduct, because we got conduct grades and I was always in a U because it was like, can't keep her mouth shut.
And the thing that they thought was an issue, and maybe in certain settings, turned out to be a huge part of your gifting, and then, turned into this full, rich career for
Yeah.
you, which is so interesting. All right, so let me say to the listeners some things to beware of, to not beware, but to look out for if they're in their journey that I see from your story early on. And so they might look back and say, what was the thing that I was always doing? That I just had to do. Like you just had to do it, even at nap time. I know I'm not supposed to, but I just have to, right? So when I believe those are clues for your purpose, those things that you always just have to do, no matter if they were frowned upon or not when you were young, or embraced or celebrated. And it sounds like you had a combination of both. Your mother in her wisdom, she knew you and she knew how to develop what she could see as your gifts and kind of geared you in the right path.
And my dad reinforced it because he was a talker too. So it was socially acceptable in our family to be that. My dad was a storyteller, my aunts and uncles, like that was how we related to each other. So I was always in a setting or often in a setting where that was reinforced.
Yeah, which is wonderful. So for people who are listening or watching now, that go back and look at your childhood and look at those things for you. And then you mentioned, Jean, that in addition to talking, you were curious and you like ideas. So those were all kind of seeds of what would become later. So I
I
think it's
love that.
fascinating that you have the story. I love kind of connecting the dots. All right, so now let's come forward, fast forward present day, or the time where you're now doing this work where you're helping others, consulting and teaching from the book. How'd you get there from where you were right before doing that?
So let's see, how did I get there? So I think first the first step in it was going back to grad school. And that was just a bucket list thing because I had intended to go to school, when I was studying psychology. And so it was always in the back of my head that I wanted to have another degree. My mother had one, most of my cousins did. So I was just kind of like, well, I need one too. Shoot. You know, just to
Oh,
say
with the family tradition. Yeah.
exactly, I'm a master of something. So And the other thing, the other reason why I went back to school was I realized, and I had kind of this inkling that there was more to what I knew than the way I was using it.
Mm,
That I had been in broadcast all this time and I knew I didn't want to be. And girl, I've worked morning shifts so many times and I call them all my tours of duty because I am not a morning person. But I was getting up at 2 and 3 in the morning to do these shows and stuff like that, especially when it
ooh,
was TV, because you got to get up and you got to put the shellac on your face and get yourself presentable and, whatever. And so the preparation time is different. And I knew I didn't want to live my life like that
mm,
for the
mm,
rest of my life. And every show has its, time and frame. And I was like, I don't think, like in my 40s, if this feels like this, I don't know if in my 50s this is what I want to be doing. In fact, I know I don't, so I better find something else. But I didn't know what I knew, what it was worth. Like I knew what my experience was and I knew what it was worth within the broadcast sphere, but I had no idea what value it had outside of that. And so I went back to grad school, and during my interview, which I didn't know was an interview at the time, I was just trying to get information. And it turns out she was trying to get information on me for admissions. She asked me why I wanted to join the program. I said, I want to know what I know.
mm,
I don't know what I know. And so when I was in that program, is when I realized the value because all of these people in my cohort are asking me for help. And that's when I'm like, oh, these things that I know that everybody else does the same as I do, if not better, in broadcast, are things that in corporate, they need to be able to get ahead, but they aren't always prepared to do it. And they didn't necessarily opt into that when they were in undergrad, high school, middle school or elementary school, because, especially the generation right, I'm Gen X. So right, the generation right behind me, that was when they stopped having to do oral book reports and stand in front of the class and, elocution was a topic. And so I found that there were people who opted into that, into the acting classes and things like that. But there were people just as many, if not more, who, because they weren't forced to do it, opted out of it. And now they're realizing if I want to be a manager, I have to be able to conduct meetings. I have to be able to present to those above me and those below me on the org chart. And I have a whole set of skills that I have no idea how to get.
mm.
And that's where the seeds of my business were born.
Ah,
And that's how I ended up here. But it all kind of unfolded because a lot of my clients, first clients, came from that program who were like, you need to come in, or like they got a promotion and were like, I'm gonna hire you to come train my staff. Some of those,
oh,
and there's at least one of those clients that I'm still actively working with today on a regular basis.
wow, wow. And so you saw the need and it kind of matched your gifts and experience that you had taken for granted because you thought, well, everybody can do this. Which, by the way, and I say this to people all the time, pay attention to the things that you take for granted that are
I say
easy
that
for
too.
you. Yeah,
Oh my
right?
gosh, I say that too, especially the things that people tell you they appreciate about you
Yes. Yes.
because, and that you go, that's nothing.
Right.
That's the key right there because
It is.
they're already telling you what it's worth. One of my business coaches early on said to me, your clients will tell you what your business is. And when I started going to her, she's the one who told me because when I met her, I still had a media and presentation training business. And she said to me, that is part of your business. But there's a whole other part of it that you're completely ignoring, that you're doing and you're giving away for free.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that was a huge lesson. And back to our earlier conversation about being authentic and how being true to who you really are. And for me, I'm like trying to help people get at their purpose. I'm like, that's a clue. That thing that we are both talking about that you just take for granted. Sure, everybody can do this easy. You don't even notice it. So you are a illustration and your life is a witness to that, right?
I try to
And,
be. I try to be.
and you teach about it. Did you have any hesitance when you thought about a business, or you just thought your graduate colleagues were, hey, they need it, let me give it to them, I'll do the business thing?
Listen, no, I did. That's not how it happened. I had great trepidation about it.
Yeah, I ask because there are people who are listening or watching and they might say, well, there's something in the back of my mind I kind of want to do. It might be a business, it might, but especially if they're thinking about a business and they hear someone who has done their own business and gotten into it, they might think, well, it's easy for them to talk about it because they could do it. They don't have the fear that I have, or they didn't have the hesitance or the stress or this reason or that reason. So that's why I asked you the question.
Huge hesitance because there was a part of me that always wanted a business and wanted that independence that I saw in my family members and friends who are entrepreneurs. But because of the high cost of production, I always thought there's no way, like, I always thought the only business I could ever have as talent was a production company. And at that time, production companies, you needed investors because a camera was 25 grand, right? One camera. That's not the editing software, the computers you need to run it on. That's not, relationships and distribution, all these things. Like, and it was so daunting to me that I was like, I can't follow an Oprah or a Bill Curtis or, people who had been who I was or done what I had done and then moved on. I was like, I just didn't see that possibility. I also didn't really want it.
Mm,
That was the other thing. I was like, do I really want to run a media company? And the answer came back like, no, because there were a lot of moving parts then. And so I had kind of accepted that I was gonna have to shift into something else. And but even when it came down to it, I had already started doing some work freelancing on the side while I was still in television. Then the show I was on got canceled. And I already had, you know, a few little clients, a couple of speaking things I had done, but it certainly wasn't enough to live on. And I've always had multiple streams of income because I don't ever believe in depending on one thing. And I've always acted as well. I did voiceover work. I've done voiceover work since I was in my 20s.
really?
And so yeah, and acting in commercials when I could on camera, but when you do on camera work, some of that commercial work falls by the wayside because it's a conflict of interest. And so when the morning show I was on got canceled, that was when I was like, I think it's time to start the business. And my financial planner said this to me because it was so funny. I was in myself and my on-air partner, we were in our last year and a half of our contract. And I was already planning my exit. and and we were, moving money around and making investments that could carry me through whatever it was I was going to do next. And I was fairly certain I was going to start a business. And my, so we were probably 2 months into that conversation when they canceled our show and fired us. And so I call RJ, my financial planner, and I was like, RJ, you're not gonna believe this. I was like, they let us go. And he said, well, do you still have a paycheck? I said, yeah, because I'm still under contract. He said, are they giving you a lump sum? I was like, they paying me as if I'm an employee. He said, fine, then nothing changes about our plan. He was like, go have a glass of champagne with Melissa and have a good time. He was like, we'll talk. And we were scheduled to talk in 2 weeks. So when we met up 2 weeks later, I'm literally sitting in his office crying because it's scary
Yeah.
when you don't have that job, when you don't have, someplace to go every day. And the novelty of being off had already worn off by the time I got to his office, right? It had been 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, I'm rested. I'm ready. What we
Mm-hmm.
doing?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what he said to me. He said, you know what, Jeanne? He said, over the years, you have had a few ideas for businesses, which I had. He said, but you never really acted on them. He was like, God keeps opening these windows. He said, you keep sticking your head through, looking out and going, no, not right now. And you come back in, and God politely closes that window and then waits a little while and opens up another. He said, you've done that several times. He said, God got tired of your shit. I'm so sorry. I don't know. That's what he said. He was like, and we were literally standing at the door to his office, and he opened the door and he said, this is what God did, and he pushed me through the door. He said, sometimes God gets tired of showing you the path that he wants you to take and you not choosing it because of whatever reason. He said, and sometimes he has to make it so that you get pushed through the door. He was like, that's what just happened to you. He said, so now it's time for the rubber to meet the road and for you to do what you got to do. He said, go see an attorney, start your business, do your thing. He said, it will happen.
Wow. Wow. What a gift to have somebody like that in your life to see you and encourage you, the thing that was in you that literally
Couldn't see.
push, but to encourage you to do that. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
interesting. I had an interview with somebody else recently, a podcast guest, either the last one or two. Similarly, she had actually retired and then from the military, and then like now what after a month, and her husband was the one that reminded her, remember, you always thought about starting a business. So it's very interesting now to hear you that you had this person in your life that reminded you and then gave you a big I don't want to say warning, but just like pay attention. Pay attention, your life is trying to
Yep.
get your attention. Yeah.
And the thing was, this is the crazy piece. I was already doing and that was what his whole point was. He was like, you are already farther along than most people are when they're putting together a business plan. He said, you already have clients. You already have people who have asked you to do things. Do it.
You were in position to do it.
I went to the Women's Business Development Center in Chicago that helps women, form their small businesses. And I checked off the little box online, like starting off my business, doing these things. And I went there and the lady goes, I can't help you. And I was like, why can't you help me? She said, you've already done everything that I would have told you to do. And I was like, huh? She was like, you already have clients. You're already earning money. You already have a business plan. She was like, you don't need me right now. And she was like, you just need to go out and work. And I was like, okay, fine then. Don't help me then.
And did you believe you could go out and just do the work between him and now her? Did you feel like you had what you needed to do this? Because again, might be inspiring somebody who's at that stage,
I'm gonna be real
whatever
with
their thing
you.
is.
I still wonder sometimes if I got I like the fact that I have a whole entire book, Robin, is beyond me. Like it's still surreal. The book has been out since like January 7th. So it's been out for several weeks now, and it's still not real to me fully.
Yeah.
I've recorded the audiobook, which is coming out in March. Still not real to me.
Oh,
I talk about it. I've done press. Still not real to me. Um,
sometimes it takes a while to set in.
and here's the thing. I think, and this is, I think, part of the thing about fearless authenticity, why I say do it scared, because the reality is that there is never, just like there's never an optimal time to have a kid, just like there's never a perfect time, to quit a job or there's always a reason. There is always a reason not to do something because it's a safe choice. There's never a perfect time to do anything. So you may as well go on and do what you want to do anyway, because there's never going to be a better time than right now. Never. There just isn't. Um, when you start making steps towards something, though, it starts making steps to meet you.
Ah,
Um, that's what I have found.
yeah.
And that's what I mean when I say when you pursue and are dedicated to your authenticity, that your purpose will find you. Because a lot of times I think we spend a lot of time looking for to try to make it all make sense. And yes, there are ways to do that. I think the questions you have your clients and your listeners asking themselves are very definitely the ways to find that. And I try to do the same thing in my work. But when you are actively listening to your gut and saying, this is the right thing, even though I know I'm scared, this is the right thing for me to do, somehow, some way, the universe conspires to make that happen for you.
Yes.
And the signs are always there. The moment is always there for you to take advantage of it. Um, and clients always show up exactly when you need that money to keep things going. There have
Yeah.
been many a moment where I've been like, I don't know if we go last another month. And every year at the end of the year, my CPA goes, another good year. Go. How did this happen?
Yeah,
So,
you stayed true to you and it kept going.
and
Yeah.
I just have to trust that that's going to keep going because I don't have another plan.
Yeah.
I don't have another plan.
Yeah. Well, if your experience so far is any indicator, you don't have to.
That's
You
what I'm
don't have to have
hoping.
you
That's
don't
what
have
I'm
to have
hoping.
another plan. All right, so now before we tell people where they can get in touch with you, is there anything that you could say to a woman who is wanting, successful on paper, but looking for meaning and purpose? You've already gave us so many nuggets. Is there one last thing you want to say to her about this quest to have more meaning and purpose for someone who may not be like you or sensitive and connected to your own intuition? She might not have that, but she still knows that she wants more. What can you share with her before we tell them where they can get in touch with you?
I have two things to say to her. And I find this to, I'm so glad you said woman in particular, because I think we as women often discount ourselves and this work resonates a lot with women. The first thing I'll say is I have an exercise I do with people and I call it uncovering authenticity. And I do it from the perspective of work because I find that most of us find our value in our work, even though we as humans are valuable regardless of what we do. But ask yourself three questions. What work do you do? And not by your job title, but by the tasks you do every day or the tasks you want to be doing every day. How do you want to fill your days? How are your days filled? Look at that. Then ask yourself who gets the benefits of that work. And that's how you figure out what that's worth and what people will pay for. But also baked into that, and this is the last question, what's important to you about providing those benefits? Because if you find the joy in something and also the unique way you do all of those things, because maybe you do something that other people do, all of us do, nothing, there's not too many one and only jobs in the world. But when you can answer those three questions, you can start to find the value and see your own value and start to move like you have value. And it will also get you in touch with that intuition that says, this is what I should be doing. So that would be my first thing I would say to her. The other thing I would say to her, and this is actually the more important thing, remember that you are the gift. Plain and simple. You are the gift that the world has been waiting for. And all of us are the gift. And when we can see that in ourselves, then we can see it in other people and see where we fit. Because I feel like this whole world, I don't know about you, it's like this big puzzle, and we're all these little pieces trying to fit somewhere. And when we find where we fit, and if you do puzzles, you know how satisfying it is when you find that one weird little shape puzzle, puzzle piece that has all those weird angles and it snaps right into place. And then all of a sudden the picture falls into place and you see what it's going to be, not just because it's on the box. You are the gift. You are that piece. And the world is waiting for you to figure out your right edges so that you snap into place. Know that.
I mean, you can just drop the mic right now. Where can people follow you and stay in touch with you because I'm sure, absolutely convinced they're like, I got to hear more. Where can
I
they?
hope they will. I have so enjoyed this conversation. When somebody else is aligned, it just feels so good. People can find me at fearlessauthenticity.com. For information about the book, it's fearlessauthenticity.com/book. On social media at JM Sparrow, and it's Sparrow like the bird. And I'm also on YouTube at Ms. Jeanne Sparrow, and that's Jeanne. That's where my podcast and a lot of that other stuff lives. But if you go to the website, all the links are there. And I hope you will connect and say hello because this conversation has been amazing.
And without even, I don't have to say, I love this conversation for many reasons. So thank you for being here and sharing your wonderful wealth of experience and joy and gifting with us. Really appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Robin. Keep preaching the good word about helping people find their purpose. We need this so much in life.
I certainly will. And for everybody listening, be the first to get on the wait list for when my book is available, Becoming a Purpose Maker, coming soon. Follow me on all social channels, but I spend most of my time on LinkedIn at Robin L. Owens, PhD, at Robin L. Owens, PhD. And I can't wait for you to see and hear what's in the book for you. And until next time, this is Dr. Robin.